2023, I would say it was all about aggressive experimentation for us with generative AI. 2024, it's all about thoughtful implementation. How do we really do this at scale?
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Shankar Arumugavelu. Shankar is the Executive Vice President and President of Verizon Global Services, a role he took on in July of 2024. That follows 7 years as the Global Chief Information Officer of the company. His new role includes running all of IT and data and analytics, but adds to it functions such as global real estate, supply chain, and sourcing, among other responsibilities. Shankar has been with the company since before it was called Verizon, joining GTE in the late 1990s. As such, he's been a part of most of the innovations that the now nearly $134 billion revenue telecommunications and media behemoth has driven. I look forward to hearing more about his new role and his thoughts on the future of technology at Verizon, among other topics. Shankar, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Well, Shankar, you've taken on a new role recently. You are now the Executive Vice President and President of Verizon Global Services. And I would love to have you describe your new role and the part of the organization that you now lead.
Certainly. I've been now in this role since July 1st of this year. It's building on my previous role, Peter. So prior to this, my role was all technology, digital, data, and AI. Now, in addition to that, what's in my remit is global supply chain, sourcing, real estate, most of the central shared support services functions.
Well, that makes sense that would be a continuation, a continuation of some of your responsibilities, but growing them as well. Out of curiosity, is this a new role for the company, or are you succeeding someone in it?
This role originally was set up back in October of 2022. So we had Craig Silliman, who was in that role. Earlier this year, Craig announced his retirement. So I'm actually succeeding Craig in this role.
Very interesting. Thank you for that description. Take a moment, if you would, and talk about the customers that you serve in Verizon Global Services.
So being a shared services function, we serve the full spectrum of Verizon. So if you take our technology function as well, so that's a global technology services organization cutting across all the units, the commercial units and the corporate functions within the company. And so is the case with our supply chain as well. So we run a large supply chain for our network organization and also for our commercial business units as well that have the P&L responsibility. We have a global sourcing function serving all departments. So virtually, this is set up as a horizontal organization supporting every single unit within Verizon.
Well, very expansive responsibilities, to say the least. Can you talk a bit about the team under you? You mentioned a variety of different roles and parts of the organization that now report to you. Do you have a leader in each of those areas of responsibility, for example? Can you talk a bit about the team you lead?
Yeah. So on the technology front, I have divisional CIOs supporting our units. So if you look at our consumer group, I have a CIO for the consumer group reporting into me. Same way we have a CIO for our business group. All our network systems, the operation support systems to plan, build, and run our network. I have a CIO for that portfolio reporting into me as well. And corporate systems, HR, finance, supply chain, sourcing, those systems, I have a CIO for that. I'm setting up a chief data and analytics office, bringing together our AI data analytics functions together. I have a leader for global real estate and another leader for global sourcing, sustainability, and supply chain, and also running all the infrastructure and platform services. Have another leader for that and a leader for strategy and transformation office for the entire Verizon Global Services organization.
Well, again, expansive and indicative of each of the areas that are under you, to say the least. I wanted to double click on the data portion of this, data and analytics. You mentioned you're setting that up, so a new set of responsibilities. It sounds like not that the organization or you as a leader haven't been keenly aware of the power of data and harnessing it on behalf of the company and the company's customers. but especially in recent years with the advances in artificial intelligence generally, generative AI more specifically, I know you believe this to be a catalyst for great innovation. And I wondered if you could offer some of the best use cases you have or can project given where we are now.
Yeah, we'll be glad to. So this new organization that I'm talking about, we have had a separate function, a central group doing AI and data. That's more the hub. We had the data and analytics groups as well. So what we are doing now is really trying to create more of a stronger hub in the center with the spokes aligned with the different business units that we have in the company. So that's the new data and analytics office. We've all along had AI and data organization, data analytics organization, but now we're taking a different cut at how we can organize ourselves with a hub and spoke model. And really the mission there is industrializing AI. So we've been doing AI for more than a decade in multiple parts of the business, all the way from how can we efficiently and effectively build our plan and build our networks, all the way to how we use them to personalize the customer experience, how we use our predictive models to address churn in our business. Churn is a big deal. How can we predict who are the customers who are likely to leave us and what kind of interventions are needed? Multiple areas across the business where we've been using AI, because if you step back and take a look at what are we on the mission here, right? It's all about taking the plethora of data that we have. How do we convert them to insights that we can then act on, right? Simply put, it's all data to actionable insights. So quite a lot of areas where we've been applying predictive AI. Like I said, with churn, for years and years, we have our churn models that predict, and that becomes a crucial part of our base management function. If you really think about the entire base, the customer base that we have as Verizon, how do we really segment them and figure out exactly which deciles or centiles we feel customers have a higher likelihood to churn and have the right kind of interventions. So now with the advent of generative AI as well, if you really look at where predictive AI excelled, it was more helping decision makers, managers. But now with predictive AI, it pretty much helps every individual contributor as well. So it has an opportunity to disrupt every persona in the organization. Quite a lot of use cases. So 2023, I would say it was all about aggressive experimentation for us with generative AI. 2024, it's all about thoughtful implementation. How do we really do this at scale? Going back to the theme of industrializing everything that we do so we can implement them at scale versus a whole bunch of science experiments that go on. So one of the areas where we recently went live with our generative AI is really having this personal research assistant for our entire customer success agents group globally, where it really helps with reducing the cognitive load for our customer success agents and instead have them build an emotional connection with the customers. If you think about prior to this being deployed, what would happen is when there were these complex queries coming from the customers, the agents had to put the customer on hold while they were going on doing all the research. And it took a while. While they were doing that work, the customer was on hold. So we stepped back and said, this is a great opportunity for us to demonstrate how we respect customers' time, at the same time, give that superpower for our agents, where it equips them with the information they need very quickly. So it becomes a win-win, both for the employee experience and the customer experience. We always believe happy employees, happy customers. And we have rolled that out at scale. Over 40,000 agents now have this capability. And we're seeing some very good, encouraging results with that. So if you think about the average handling time, we're seeing good reduction in average handling time as well, that we are then able to put that back to other areas of the business for us to really see how can we take that savings that we have in productivity and convert them to the right sell opportunities for our customers. We're also seeing the time that we are placing the customer on hold. That's gone down by 20%. So that is a big deal when you really talk about customer satisfaction, and goes back to the point I made before on how we demonstrate that we respect the customer's time, and the satisfaction scores that we get from customers are very high for those who go through this experience. We're also seeing what before this research assistant was deployed, our agents had to swivel chair into multiple tools to really find the information. So we're seeing an 80% reduction in them having to do that, right? So it's really validating a lot of the hypotheses that we had going into this. So we're bullish on this. So if you really think about what we're going after here, it's one design pattern or an archetype of knowledge as a service. And what we have done for our customer success agents, we are now able to do that for other similar groups, whether it be for our network technicians out in the field, where they have to go through the methods and procedures to figure out how do I troubleshoot problems. That's a classic use case where you have a digital companion guiding them. We're using the same across the multiple personas in the company as well for solving that problem of knowledge as a service, all about reducing the cognitive load. Same thing we're seeing applied on our developer community as well. So how can generative AI be a good pair programmer, if you will, for our developers so they can be more productive, write better code, high quality code, the test documentation is good, the test case generation is good. So multiple areas where we're seeing an opportunity of how generative AI is really having us think differently. And the next big area where we're now looking at is, rather than having generative AI just going after specific tasks, how do we take certain functions end to end and stitch predictive AI and generative AI together to really reimagine that entire process? I'll give you an example. If you take base management, right, when you have a large customer base like ours with 140 million subscribers, you have to figure out first, how do I really identify the right audience? So that's the whole audiencing part. Then what kind of offers do we have to tailor? So offer creation is the next piece of it. Decisioning is the third. And then ultimately comes the communication part. Those are the four key steps when you talk about base management. We now have AI across all these steps. So we are using predictive AI for the first three steps I talked about: audiencing, offer creation, and decisioning. And generative AI now complements this whole thing now to be able to generate the personalized campaigns. So it completes the whole picture. So combination of predictive and generative AI fundamentally is giving us an opportunity now to reimagine how we have done things for years and years.
Compelling examples all. I really appreciate you sharing those, Shankar. I wanted to ask you, this is now something that clearly is very pervasive. And as you noted, pervasive across technically inclined and non-technically inclined colleagues of yours alike. And I wonder what sort of training has been necessary in order to ensure that this is effectively implemented. Have you found that, AI and generative AI has become easier to understand for people who are not technically inclined? Have there been major advances from that perspective? Have you developed training campaigns of one sort or another? Talk a bit about how you've unrolled that.
Absolutely. So early on, right after ChatGPT became the big thing, right? So this is back in November 2022. There was a whole groundswell of everybody talking about this, and you had a group that was always wanting to stay abreast with the latest advances, and they were doing things on their own. Very quickly, I want to say in early 2023, we took first I had the AI, the technology team as well, go through a master class of all things. What is generative AI? What it isn't? And how do you use this? What kind of problems are we trying to solve, can be solved with generative AI? How can you combine this along with the stuff that we have done with predictive AI? So that masterclass helped my technology leaders, the AI leaders, ground themselves on how to really use this technology and be those evangelists and ambassadors inside the company. So they really took the ownership, and then we started bringing our business teams along as well. And now, more and more, the courses that we have started rolling out, the concept of even as simple as what is prompt engineering? Because one thing in generative AI you will see is it's all about how you phrase the question. So what kind of prompts can be created for the foundation models to come back with the right kind of response that we are looking for? So we had our marketing team, going back to the example I talked about, base management, all a part of this exercise as well, to say how you really have marketeers also now become good prompt engineers as well, to be able to generate and personalize that campaign content. So on a very selective basis, we've been going through the organizations, bringing the different groups to see how this can be put to work. Then you fast forward, we set up an AI council across the company that I chair, where we have representation from leaders across all the functions. And now we use that as a forum to really prioritize what are the use cases that we're going to be focused on. So they now cascade that message through. And we've been very clear from day one how we're going to prioritize the use cases is basically through the following criteria, right? Look at the strategic importance of the use case. What is the value at stake? What is the technology feasibility? And what is the risk involved with this as well? So once it passes through those filters, now we have a good set of use cases, relevant kind of training that's needed for the groups. And it cannot be a one and done as well, right? Once you deploy something like this in production at scale, how do you really make sure that there is a regular management life cycle post it go live? And that is the big part that we should be very mindful of when you talk about industrializing AI, similar to what we had done with predictive AI. There is a way, once you deploy these models, how do you measure the model drift? How do you measure the precision recall and things like that? What we did in classic AI and machine learning use cases, we have to apply that same kind of discipline for generative AI and also be mindful of the cost as well. So FinOps, similar to the journey that we've all been on, going to the public cloud for our compute workloads, we have to be very mindful of how we're managing the cost when it comes to these kind of inferencing actions as well. So if you don't know what we're doing, you can rack up a pretty hefty bill very quickly.
Well, you bring up a fascinating set of points there, one of which I wanted to linger on a little bit longer. Verizon is one of the largest companies on earth. And as you think about scale, that means something different for you, for your organization than for most. And I know for innovation and experimentation, generally speaking, a lot of companies have developed innovation labs that produce fascinating prototypes that never really see the light of day, certainly don't move the needle at scale for, let's say, $1 billion organization. For one that's hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue and the size of Verizon, you need to be thinking about a much bigger needle that is moving. And I like the way in which you describe the prioritization criteria of strategic importance. What's the value at stake? What is the tech feasibility? What's the risk? And I assume incumbent upon all of that is also then thinking about the overall value that this might derive, so that it's not a series of small, interesting experiments that really don't do much for the company at large. How do you think about that scaling point, if I might ask you to linger on that a little longer?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've always made sure when we have things like this, there isn't a separate team that's just ideating or running just these experiments in a silo. We always look at, if we come up with something, how do we make sure that we can accelerate time to value on these innovations, Peter? So very early on, we bring the business. So it's always a business and technology doing these things together. So within technology, one thing that I talk with my leadership team is always being business leader first, technology leader second. So when it's always that purposeful innovation that we are after, right? So in this example of what we had done with the customer success agents as well, it all started from day one, knowing what the capability that ChatGPT was able to do out there. And then we said, okay, there are all these large language models that are coming up there. How do you go about selecting what is the right kind of LLM that you need to be using for your particular use case? What are the business challenges that we can solve with this? So right from day one, the mission was very clear. we can go after all these things. That pause that happens between the agent and the customer when they're doing all these research, that is a friction area for the customer. So what can we do there through AI? How can that help assist the agent in solving the customer's problem in an expeditious manner? So that's what led to all this research on how we first figure out where do we have all the knowledge bases, how do we curate this knowledge base, how do we really prepare them, do the right level of pre-processing that's needed for generative AI to be effective in that case. And these are, we didn't get it right the first time, right? You have to test and learn as you go through this before you implement this at scale, handling millions and millions of inferencing questions at the scale at which we are operating, also mindful of what kind of cost we're going to incur on the other side as well. So we have struck that balance now, and now we have a blueprint that pretty much is serving us well for multiple use cases that we can light up of serving different personas in the company. So it's a business, it's always two in a box, business and technology together, making sure that there is both of them are comfortable in each other's backyard of what it is, how are we applying technology, and making sure that the technology teams have a clear orientation of what is the business problem we're trying to solve right from day one. And along the way, if we see that this is not hunting, you fail fast, learn from that and move on.
You served as Global Chief Information Officer for roughly 7 years. And now you've expanded your portfolio, as you described before, to include, as you noted, supply chain, global real estate, global sourcing, sustainability, other areas that are perhaps traditionally adjacencies for a CIO and the IT organization. And I wonder what would you suggest from your time as a CIO prepared you well to expand your purview into some of these adjacent areas? What about that work in the first suggests the possibility for innovation and improvement in some of the other areas that are new parts of your portfolio?
I always believe, so you look at any business, primarily there are three elements that make up any business, right? It's people, process, technology. So coming from a technology background and the way the organization was structured and the role that the technology team was serving before, we had a unique vantage point into the entire business. I may be biased, but I can tell you the technology organization saw every part of business. And along the way, we also saw what was not working the way it should. This is where the opportunity for process. How do we make sure the left hand and the right hand are talking to each other at all times? So just the vantage point of what we had as a technology function, serving all the groups and seeing where we have gaps, air gaps that need to be filled, that was a big enabler for us, for positioning me to take on this additional role as well. The other thing I would say is being in that role, in the technology role, serving the entire organization, it is a unique opportunity to build social capital, people, relationships, and the trust, the credibility, and the respect that you gain out of that. And that is another key enabler as well. As I take on these additional roles, that social capital certainly helps me. And the relationships that I had across the entire organization, leaders and the teams across all the functions, serving the technology function, positioned me well to now also say, any sourcing needs, you have one place to come. Here is how we're going to measure. And here is how we're going to enable you to not see us just as a cost center, but really more as a value creation center. How can we be that growth enabler for those units? So the orientation changes then. So you take shared accountability for the objectives of all the units that you're serving. I think it comes down to exactly that. People, process, figuring out and simplifying and standardizing the processes just because of the vantage point that we have had all along. And the beauty is, once you streamline and standardize the process, you then apply technology on top of that to digitize that. So it all ladders up really well. And I think that is what I would say has served me well from coming from the technology background, taking these additional responsibilities.
And I have to imagine, as we've talked about in the past, Shankar, the advantage of you began with a preceding company, GTE, in the last millennium. You've been with a part of what would be Verizon since the 90s. And so as a result, you've grown with the company. You've seen its many iterations. You understand the waves of innovation. You understand the complexities of a growing business, of an acquisitive business. And I have to imagine that's also very helpful just because you have a muscle memory that naturally develops in addition to your tremendous talent. I don't mean to minimize that, of course, but a muscle memory, nevertheless, just that is born of having been with the organization for quite some time. I imagine that's also advantageous as you think about a role like this.
Very much so. Very much so. It is the relationships and knowing, having so much of history within the company as well, the organization, the people and the processes, also the objectives that we are after, really has served me well in terms of taking this additional responsibility. And one thing that I always say, if I look at this new role that I have in global services, the key skill that's needed for us to be successful is problem solving. Because that is invariably, if you look at the vantage point we sit in, my organization now sits, we see everything going on in the business and we identify opportunities there. So now the next step is, okay, how do we solve that? So, having that background, being in technology and having that problem solving orientation, the analytical orientation as well, is another thing that really helps be a catalyst for us to be successful in this role.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We've talked about a number of trends, and we've talked in the past also that yours is a company that is one of the trendsetters, actually, as so much of what we take for granted in terms of our ability to connect to the internet, to connect with each other, to communicate with each other, is brought to life by an organization like Verizon. So you've seen waves of innovation firsthand and even helped drive many of those waves of innovation. And I wonder, especially given that history, what excites you now as you look to the future, Shankar? What are some of the things that are making their way on your roadmap, and perhaps you and the team are experimenting with, not unlike some of what you've described previously with generative AI?
So clearly, from a connectivity standpoint, like you mentioned, Peter, connectivity has found its place on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It is there. And if anything, I think what COVID did to all of us, it truly cemented that, to say how critical connectivity is in our daily lives. Now, as we look at where we go beyond and the trends as well, clearly AI is going to play a big part. I think with predictive AI and generative AI as well, one of the things that we see, if we combine that with the kind of edge solutions that we provide as a connectivity service provider, you're going to see more and more of edge AI happening, right? So traditionally, if you look at how models are built, you collect all that data. The data then goes to the algorithm and you build the model. What you're going to see as well is more and more where the algorithm gets closer to the data. So, and this is where connectivity plus the low latency connectivity, which we are able to offer with our 5G services, you combine that with the kind of capabilities that we get with AI, you're going to see edge AI become a big thing as well. So we see that as an opportunity for us to really see how we now can have AI and connectivity define a whole new array of services that we will be able to offer, and more to come on that front. Extremely low latency use cases, many more things. I think you're going to see a big focus in that area. The other thing that I see as well, more as if I even look at with generative AI, you're going to see where more and more the interaction with digital tools are going to be done through natural language, more so than the traditional way of how we have done human-computer interface through these graphical user interfaces, right? So that, because that helps bridge the digital divide, that comes naturally to us as humans. how we communicate. So why should it be any different when we interact with technology? Why can't we just communicate? So I think, and we're seeing the early generations of that as well with all the different chatbots that we are used to every day. I think that is going to become more and more as well. And in fact, internally within Verizon, also one of the aspirations that we have with generative AI, in addition to empowering our people through improving their productivity, is all about how do we enable natural language, enable our customers and employees to interact with our digital tools through natural language interfaces. So more and more conversational AI being a part of how we interact with technology. I think that is something that I'm excited. You will start to see that become more and more mainstream as well.
Great example, and certainly makes a lot of sense that yours would be a company that would bring that to life. I wanted to close, Shankar, and asking you if there's anything that you've recently read, watched, and/or listened to that you would recommend to others, knowing that you're somebody who is has a broad intellectual diet, helping you identify what the next new thing may be. What's something that you might recommend to your peers?
Yeah, lately I've been listening to the Acquired podcasts with Ben and David. I've been really fascinated with a lot of the interviews, how deep they go, the kind of preparation they do ahead of those things. So I've been really fascinated. Those are something that I like to listen to more. To me, I think of those more as this conversational audiobooks that you just so that's something that I'm having a lot of fun listening to that.
I'm a big fan of theirs as well. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Shankar Arumugavelu, thank you so much for taking time with me today. Congratulations on your continued professional progress, the remarkable innovation you and your team are driving. Also fascinating to get a little bit of a look into what's to come as well. As usual, it's been a great and very insightful conversation.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's always a pleasure.